Often in life, we can feel under pressure. Often in life, we feel like we've had all that we can take. We've had it up to here. We're brimming over in our pain. We feel we're about to crack. There seems no end in sight to the difficult situation we're in. So in a moment, we're going to look about what the Apostle Paul says about comparing us to treasure in clay jars. Clay jars in Paul's time were an everyday object. Nowadays, unfortunately, we might have lots of plastic around as our everyday objects. So if we imagine that this is how we feel sometimes, we feel like a bottle that's being pressed, it's being under pressure, it can't take anymore. And yet, as we will see, there's something precious still inside. Some precious treasure that God can still share with us, can still give to us. So let's look at what the apostle says when he feels like he is hard pressed under pressure, and he's talking to people at the church at Corinth. So let's look at that now. He says, but we have this treasure in jars of clay to show that this all-surpassing power is from God and not from us. We are hard pressed on every side, but not crushed, perplexed, but not in despair, persecuted, but not abandoned, struck down, but not destroyed. And then the passage continues. We always carry around in our body the death of Jesus, Paul continues, so that the life of Jesus may also be revealed in our body. For we who are alive are always being given over to death for Jesus' sake, so that his life may also be revealed in our mortal body. So then, death is at work in us, but life is at work in you. Jars of clay were common objects in Paul's day, as we've said, for everyday purposes, such as containers for oil, wine, water, vinegar, and milk. Clay vessels were also sometimes used for lamps and to store money. Paul's choice of a clay jar as metaphor for the human body suggests its ordinariness and its fragility. Clay was everywhere, but it could be broken. So it was and still is with the followers of Jesus today. Living in this world that is not as it should be, we are vulnerable. Things happen in life that cause us suffering. Paul never promised the churches that he oversaw that life for Christians would be easy. In fact, he talks about a thorn in his own flesh, a mysterious pain that he asked the Lord to take away. That God has left him with it, but said that he will find strength in his weakness. So Paul refers to this ongoing pain or difficulty that he has in his life. We don't know whether that was something emotional, physical, sexual, we just don't know. But we do know that it was a burden he had to carry throughout his ministry. So he knows about suffering. He's also obviously had times in prison, had times when he's been shipwrecked, where he had nothing. So he knows about suffering, but he's telling the churches that he visits that although suffering will be part of their Christian life, that there is still hope. And that's what we're looking at today. Paul declares that within the fragile vessels that we are lies treasure. And treasure is referred to in other parts of the Bible on a number of occasions. In Psalm 19, the speaker says, I receive your word like one who discovers a great treasure. Deuteronomy speaks of God's people as his treasured possession. Isaiah describes God as a rich store of salvation and wisdom and knowledge. And Paul echoes this same part of Isaiah. The Gospels contrast temporary worldly riches with the eternal treasure of God's kingdom. Mary, the mother of Jesus, is said to treasure up God's message to her. In a similar way to how followers of Jesus can show God's light, so Christians contain within themselves God's treasure. It is within our frail bodies. God grants us power. So this is an ongoing theme throughout the Old and New Testaments of worldly treasure being nothing to the treasure that will come in the redeemed world, the treasure that only God can bring. So when Mary receives news of the Annunciation that she will bear Jesus Christ, she treasures up that message in her heart. We are God's treasure. We are God's treasured possession. And the heavenly kingdom is compared to a treasure discovered in a field. So just when we feel that we can't go on and it seems as if circumstances will defeat us, God stops a seemingly inevitable consequence from happening. Paul lists the pressures and risks that Jesus' followers are experiencing and pairs these with God's thwarting of the expected outcome. So if we think about being hard pressed, we feel the logical conclusion of being under pressure would be that there'll be a cracking, a breaking. But Paul goes to explain how the consequence that Christians might be expecting doesn't happen. So when we're hard pressed, we expect to be crushed, but we're not. When we feel perplexed, we expect to be in despair, but we're not, although we may feel close to it. When we are persecuted, we might expect to be abandoned by people and by God, but we're not. God steps in before we go over the edge. Paul goes on later in this chapter to list the differences between our present earthly lives and our promised eternal lives in God's kingdom. God will bring transformation. Death will become life. Darkness will become light. We will go from wasting away to renewal. Troubles will be exchanged for glory. In the redeemed world, we will see what we now cannot, and the temporary will become eternal. So we've got death turning to life. We've got darkness turning to light. We've got wasting away to renewal. We've got troubles for glory. Temporary becoming eternal. In 1 Peter, the writer talks about how the suffering of Christians and says that their faith is of greater worth than gold, which perishes even though refined by fire. Their faith, he says, will lead to their eventual glory, honor, and bring them joy. I'm not suggesting that suffering is a test from God. We suffer, I think, because we live in a broken world with ourselves and other broken people. And suffering is not necessarily a virtue, but God can use our pain and mold us for his service through it. So there's this idea of gold being refined by fire and by it having its impurities taken out. And so Peter is comparing that to the suffering that people may feel as they go through this life. The books of Isaiah and Jeremiah have an image of God's people as clay in the hands of the master potter. In Isaiah, the speaker longs for the Lord to step in and put things right, and yet he is still waiting for this to happen as we are. So he says, God, will you come down? He's begging God to come down into the earthly realm and put things right. And we may also often echo a similar cry. The speaker in Isaiah calls upon the Lord. He calls him Father. He calls him the potter. His people are the work of his hands. This is a close, intimate relationship where God is forming human beings by hand. He's molding them. And yet in Jeremiah, we also see how vulnerable these people of clay are, how easily marred and how in need of God's protection. So clay vessels can easily be broken, destroyed as well. In medieval times, people fervently sought the philosopher's stone, which was said to turn base metal into gold. So there was this myth that people could find something that would transform ordinary metal into gold. But we know that only God can bring transformation. Only he can turn the base clay of humanity into the treasure of the kingdom. So today, let us admit our fragility and our need for God. Let us tell others about He, our loving parent, cries with us. Let us allow ourselves to be shaped by Him and let none of our pain be wasted. Let us follow God's leading and how we can use it to draw alongside others. Let us follow His calling into our ministries and mission. Let us allow ourselves to be shaped by God and let none of our pain be wasted. Let us follow God's leading and how we can use this pain to draw alongside others in this broken world that we're in. We are hard pressed, but we're not crushed. God is with us. He puts treasure of his kingdom within us, his jars of clay.